The high-speed train from Madrid to Granada cut through the Andalusian countryside like a silver arrow, carrying Peter and Klaus toward what could be the most significant archaeological discovery of their lifetimes. The journey took less than 3 hours, but Peter felt as though he was traveling through centuries of Portuguese maritime history that had been hidden in his family's bloodline. Klaus spent most of the trip studying the photocopied documents from Toledo, cross-referencing them with his own research notes and occasionally muttering in German as pieces of the historical puzzle fell into place. Peter found himself both grateful for the historian's expertise and increasingly wary of the convenient timing of their partnership. The Alhambra complex is massive, Klaus explained as they approached Granada. 13 hectares of palaces, gardens, and fortifications. But according to your family's maps, the hidden chamber is located in the Generalife Gardens, away from the main tourist areas. Peter gazed out the window as Granada's distinctive skyline came into view. The red walls of the Alhambra dominated the hillside, rising above the modern city like a crown of Moorish architectural perfection. The sight took his breath away, even from a distance. The palace complex radiated an otherworldly beauty that seemed to transcend time itself. "How do we get inside after hours?" Peter asked, his Chicago experience with security systems making him automatically assess the challenges they would face. "That's where your family's Portuguese merchant background becomes useful," Klaus replied with a slight smile. According to the documents, the Mateus family had legitimate business relationships with the Nasrid rulers of Granada. They didn't just hide treasures. They were granted special access to conduct trade negotiations in private chambers. As their train pulled into Granada's Santa Justa station, Peter felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and apprehension that had become his constant companion since arriving in Spain. Each new city brought revelations that reshaped his understanding of his own identity, but also brought new dangers from forces he still didn't fully understand. The afternoon sun was intense as they emerged from the air-conditioned train into the dry heat of Andalusia. Granada felt different from Madrid and Toledo, more exotic, more mysterious, with an undercurrent of North African influence that reminded visitors of Spain's complex multicultural heritage. Their first stop was a modest hotel in the Albayacin neighborhood, the historic Moorish quarter that offered stunning views of the Alhambra across the Darro River Valley. From their hotel room's small balcony, Peter could see the red walls and towers of the palace complex, illuminated by the golden late afternoon light that made Granada famous among photographers and artists. "We'll join a regular tourist group tomorrow morning," Klaus suggested, spreading the ancient maps across their small table. "It's the best way to scout the locations without attracting attention." Peter studied the Portuguese documents with new understanding. His ancestors' handwriting was surprisingly clear, even after 5 centuries, and the detailed maps showed not just the public areas of the Alhambra, but hidden passages, private chambers, and what appeared to be a sophisticated security system designed to protect valuable cargo. "My family weren't just merchants," Peter realized aloud. "They were essentially running a high-level smuggling operation." "Cultural preservation," Klaus corrected gently. "During periods of religious and political persecution, families like yours were often the only way important manuscripts, artworks, and scientific documents could survive. You should be proud of that legacy." That evening, they walked through the narrow streets of the Albayacin, observing the Alhambra from different angles and noting the various entrance points. The palace was closed to visitors after sunset, but security appeared to rely more on the natural barriers of walls and elevation than on modern surveillance systems. At a small tapas bar near the Mirador de San Nicolas, they overheard a conversation in English that made both men freeze. 2 men in expensive suits were discussing the Portuguese cash and the American who's been asking questions in Toledo. Peter and Klaus exchanged glances but continued eating their jamon and olives as if they hadn't heard anything. When the 2 men left the bar, Klaus followed at a discreet distance while Peter paid the bill and took a different route back to their hotel. "Corporate types," Klaus reported when they reconnected. "1 American, 1 British, staying at the Parador Hotel inside the Alhambra grounds. They have official access." The news was both concerning and informative. Other parties were clearly tracking Peter's movements, but their presence also confirmed that whatever was hidden in the Alhambra was valuable enough to attract serious attention. The next morning dawned clear and hot, perfect weather for tourists exploring one of Spain's most famous monuments. Peter and Klaus joined a guided tour group, blending in with couples from Germany, families from Japan, and backpackers from various countries, all drawn to experience the legendary beauty of the Alhambra. Their guide, a passionate young woman named Carmen, led them through the Court of the Lions, the Hall of the Ambassadors, and the intricate chambers of the Nasrid palaces. Peter found himself genuinely moved by the architectural perfection he witnessed. The interplay of light and shadow, the mathematical precision of the geometric decorations, the way water and stone had been combined to create spaces that felt both earthly and divine. But his real attention was focused on memorizing security camera locations, guard patrol patterns, and the layout of areas not included in the public tour. Klaus, meanwhile, was photographing architectural details that corresponded to landmarks mentioned in the Portuguese documents. When the tour reached the General Life Gardens, Peter felt his pulse quicken. According to his family's maps, the hidden chamber was located somewhere beneath the terrace gardens that cascaded down the hillside in a symphony of fountains, cypress trees, and flower beds. The water system here is incredibly sophisticated, Carmen explained as they walked along the canal that ran through the center of the Patio de la Acequia. The Moorish engineers created a network of underground channels that still supplies water to the entire complex. Peter and Klaus exchanged meaningful glances. Underground water channels would provide perfect cover for hidden chambers and secret access points. During the lunch break, while other tourists gathered in the shade near the Palace of Charles V, Peter and Klaus slipped away to explore a section of the gardens that was roped off for maintenance. Following the Portuguese map, they located what appeared to be an old maintenance access point disguised as decorative stonework. "Tonight," Klaus whispered as they rejoined the tour group, 2 a.m., when the security patrol is at its lightest. What do you think Peter and Klaus will find in the hidden chambers beneath the Alhambra? And who are these mysterious corporate types following their every move? Share your theories in the comments. The afternoon passed slowly as they completed the official tour and returned to their hotel to prepare for the night's adventure. Peter checked and rechecked his equipment, flashlights, tools for opening old locks, and a camera for documenting whatever they might find. Klaus seemed unusually nervous, constantly checking his phone and looking out the window toward the Alhambra. "Are you having second thoughts?" Peter asked as they prepared to leave the hotel at 1:30 a.m. "Not second thoughts," Klaus replied carefully, "but I keep thinking about what we might unleash. Some secrets are kept hidden for good reasons." Peter studied his companion's face in the dim light of their hotel room. "Klaus, is there something you're not telling me about this operation?" Klaus was quiet for a long moment before answering. "My grandfather's notes mentioned that the Portuguese cache isn't just historical documents and artifacts. According to his research, it also contains information that could be politically sensitive even today." "What kind of information?" "Trade routes that are still in use. Financial networks that have operated continuously since the 15th century. Names of families and organizations that prefer to remain anonymous." Peter felt a chill of recognition. His own work in corporate espionage had taught him that some information was valuable precisely because it revealed connections that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. "Are you saying we might be walking into something dangerous?" "I'm saying we should be very careful about who we trust with what we find," Klaus replied grimly. The Alhambra at night was a different world entirely. Without the crowds of tourists and the bright Spanish sunshine, the palace complex felt ancient and mysterious, full of shadows and whispered secrets. Security lighting illuminated the main pathways, but large sections remained cloaked in darkness. Peter and Klaus approached through the General Life Gardens, using the terraced landscaping as cover while they made their way to the maintenance access point they had identified earlier. The sound of flowing water from the complex fountain system helped mask their footsteps as they worked. The decorative stonework proved to be exactly what the Portuguese maps had indicated, a cleverly disguised entrance to the underground water management system. Klaus's lockpicking skills, developed through years of archival research, made quick work of the ancient but well-maintained mechanism. "Your ancestors were remarkably thorough," Klaus whispered as they descended a narrow stone staircase that led beneath the gardens. This access route is still in perfect condition after 5 centuries. The underground passages were dry and surprisingly well ventilated, suggesting that they had been designed for more than just water management. Emergency lighting, clearly installed much more recently, illuminated their path as they followed the Portuguese map deeper into the hillside. After nearly 10 minutes of careful navigation through increasingly narrow passages, they reached a heavy wooden door marked with the same symbols they had seen on the documents from Toledo. Peter's ancestral key fitted perfectly into the lock, which turned with surprising smoothness. The chamber beyond took both men's breath away. It was larger than either had expected, a roughly circular room carved directly into the bedrock beneath the Alhambra, with stone shelves lining the walls and a vaulted ceiling that disappeared into shadows above their flashlight beams. But it was the contents of those shelves that left them speechless. Hundreds of manuscripts, charts, and documents were carefully preserved in oiled leather wrappings. Wooden chests lined one wall, their surfaces covered in Portuguese and Spanish maritime symbols. Display cases, clearly installed more recently, contained navigational instruments, astrolabes, and what appeared to be samples of precious metals and gemstones. "This isn't just a hidden archive," Klaus breathed. "This is a complete record of Portuguese maritime exploration, preserved in perfect condition." Peter approached one of the display cases and found himself staring at a collection of maps unlike anything he had ever seen. These weren't the simplified charts found in history textbooks, but detailed navigational records showing precise locations of islands, harbors, and trade routes across the Atlantic, Indian, and Pacific Oceans. Some of these routes, Peter realized, are still classified by modern governments. Klaus was examining a shelf of bound manuscripts. Scientific treatises, astronomical calculations, medicinal knowledge from Africa and Asia. This is Renaissance knowledge that was thought to be lost forever. But the most intriguing discovery was a section of the chamber dedicated to what appeared to be financial records. Ledgers, contracts, and correspondence dating back centuries, all meticulously preserved and organized. Trade agreements, Klaus explained as he examined the documents. But not just for goods. This looks like a record of information exchange, cultural preservation efforts, and... Oh my God! What? Klaus held up a leather-bound ledger, his hands shaking slightly. This is a record of families and organizations that have been secretly funding cultural preservation efforts for centuries. Peter, some of these names, they're still prominent today. Politicians, business leaders, royal families. Peter felt a familiar chill. This was exactly the kind of sensitive information that had gotten him into trouble in Chicago. We're not just looking at historical artifacts. We're looking at evidence of ongoing secret networks. Networks that have been operating continuously since the age of exploration, Klaus confirmed. And according to these records, your family has been one of the key coordinators. They had been in the chamber for nearly an hour, photographing documents and taking detailed notes, when they heard sounds from the passage outside. Footsteps, multiple people, moving with purpose rather than stealth. Peter and Klaus exchanged alarmed glances and quickly gathered their most important findings. There was no other exit from the chamber. They would have to face whoever was approaching. The footsteps stopped outside the door. A voice called out in accented English, "Mr. Matthews, we know you're in there. We're not here to harm you, but we do need to have a conversation." Peter recognized the voice as belonging to one of the men they had overheard at the tapas bar. He looked at Klaus, who nodded grimly and began switching off their flashlights. "We're archaeological researchers," Peter called back. "We have permission to be here." "I'm sure you do," the voice replied with amusement. "Your family's permissions for this site go back quite a long time, but the situation has become complicated. Please come out so we can discuss this properly." Klaus moved close to Peter's ear. "There's something I haven't told you," he whispered urgently. "My grandfather's notes mentioned that there are multiple groups interested in these archives. Not all of them are friendly. Are you saying these could be the bad guys?" "I'm saying I don't know who the bad guys are anymore." Peter made a decision. "We're coming out. he called. But slowly, and with our hands visible, they emerged from the chamber to find 3 people waiting in the passage. The 2 men from the tapas bar, and a woman Peter had never seen before. All were dressed in professional attire that seemed oddly formal for a middle-of-the-night archaeological expedition. "Mr. Matthews," the American man said politely, "my name is David Chun, and I represent certain interests that have been, shall we say, cooperating with your family's preservation efforts for quite some time." "What kind of interests?" Peter asked warily. "The kind that prefer to remain anonymous," Chun replied. "But I can assure you that we want the same thing you do, to ensure that your family's legacy is preserved and protected." The British man stepped forward. "The problem, Mr. Matthews, is that other parties have become aware of your activities. Parties with considerably less noble intentions." Klaus moved slightly behind Peter. "What kind of other parties?" "Collectors who believe that historical artifacts belong in private hands," the woman answered. "Governments that would prefer certain trade route information remain classified indefinitely. Organizations that see your family's financial records as a threat to their current operations." Chin nodded seriously. "The point is, Mr. Matthews, that your journey of discovery has attracted attention from people who would rather eliminate both you and these archives than risk exposure." Peter felt the weight of centuries of family responsibility settling on his shoulders. "So what are you suggesting?" "We're suggesting that you allow us to help you," Chin replied, "to provide security and resources while you continue your investigation. In exchange, we ask only that you keep us informed of your discoveries and allow us to help determine how and when sensitive information should be revealed." Klaus stepped forward. "And if we refuse?" The 3 strangers exchanged glances. "Then we wish you the best of luck," the British man said. "But we cannot guarantee your safety." Peter and Klaus spent several long minutes in tense negotiation with the mysterious representatives. It became clear that these people had extensive knowledge of the Portuguese archives and the Matthews family history, but their true motivations remained opaque. "We need time to consider your offer," Peter finally said, "and we need to continue our research independently before making any commitments." Chun nodded understanding. "Of course, but please understand that time may be limited. Other interested parties are likely to make contact soon, and they may not be as diplomatic as we are." After the 3 strangers departed, Peter and Klaus returned to the chamber to collect the most critical documents and artifacts they had discovered. They worked quickly but carefully, knowing that this might be their only opportunity to study these materials without external interference. "We can't trust them," Klaus said as they prepared to leave. "But we also can't ignore their warnings about other groups." "Agreed," Peter replied, "which means we need to stay mobile and continue following the leads we found." Among the Portuguese documents, they had discovered references to Barcelona specifically, to connections between the maritime trade networks and Catalan merchant families in the 15th and 16th centuries. The references suggested that important documents and possibly artifacts had been moved from Granada to Barcelona during periods of political instability. "Barcelona makes sense as our next destination," Klaus observed. "It was one of the major Mediterranean ports during the Age of Exploration, and it had strong connections to Portuguese trade networks." They left the Alhambra as quietly as they had entered, but both men felt the weight of being watched as they made their way back through the sleeping city to their hotel. By dawn, they had checked out and were on a high-speed train heading northeast toward Catalonia. As the Andalusian countryside gave way to the landscapes of central Spain, Peter reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since his arrival in Madrid. He had come to Spain seeking escape from his Chicago past, but instead had found himself drawn into a mystery that connected him to centuries of family history and potentially dangerous contemporary politics. "Klaus," Peter said as they approached the Catalan border, "when we get to Barcelona, I want complete honesty between us. No more surprises, no more mysterious connections that you forgot to mention. If we're going to continue this partnership, I need to know I can trust you completely." Klaus met Peter's gaze steadily. "You can trust me, Peter, but you should also know that Barcelona may present challenges that neither of us is fully prepared for. The Catalan archives I've researched suggest that your family's activities there were more politically complex than their work in other cities. More complex how? Barcelona was where the Portuguese networks intersected with Catalan independence movements, French trade interests, and Spanish royal politics. Your ancestors weren't just preserving documents. They were playing a very dangerous game of international intrigue. As their train pulled into Barcelona's sand station, Peter felt both excitement and apprehension about what they would discover in the Catalan capital. The city's famous architecture and vibrant culture awaited them, but so did mysteries that could prove even more challenging than the secrets they had uncovered beneath the Alhambra. Thank you for staying with us through this incredible adventure beneath the Alhambra. The hidden archives revealed treasures beyond imagination, but they also brought dangerous new players into Peter's journey. Klaus has proven to be both valuable ally and source of concern. His knowledge is invaluable, but his connections to other interested parties raise questions about his true loyalties. And now mysterious corporate representatives are offering both help and veiled threats, making Peter's situation more complex than ever. The Portuguese documents point to Barcelona as the next crucial piece of the puzzle, but Klaus warns that the political complexities there may be even more challenging than what they've faced so far. What do you think awaits Peter in Barcelona? Can he continue to trust Klaus? Or should he be more suspicious of his companion's hidden connections? And who were those mysterious representatives, allies or enemies in disguise? Don't miss the next episode, The Hidden Balcony of Barcelona, where Peter will discover that his family's legacy involves not just treasure and documents, but also a story of forbidden love that has left clues hidden in one of Barcelona's most romantic locations. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a moment of Peter's incredible journey through Spain's hidden history. The greatest discoveries and the greatest dangers are still ahead. The high-speed train from Granada to Barcelona swept Peter and Klaus through the heart of Spain, covering nearly 1,000 kilometers in under 7 hours. As the arid landscapes of Andalusia gave way to the Mediterranean coastline of Catalonia, Peter found himself contemplating how dramatically his understanding of his own identity had evolved since leaving Chicago just weeks ago. The documents they had photographed in the Alhambra's hidden chamber contained numerous references to Barcelona, but these weren't simple trade records or navigation charts. Instead, they appeared to be personal correspondence, written in a mixture of Portuguese and Catalan, filled with references to secret meetings, hidden locations, and what could only be described as romantic intrigue. Klaus had been unusually quiet during the journey, spending most of his time studying his own research notes and occasionally making encrypted phone calls in German. Peter's growing suspicions about his traveling companion had been amplified by their encounter with the mysterious representatives in Granada, and he found himself wondering whether Klaus was truly the helpful academic he claimed to be. As their train pulled into Barcelona's Franca station, Peter felt the familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension that had accompanied his arrival in each new Spanish city. But Barcelona felt different from the others, more cosmopolitan, more connected to the broader European world, and somehow more dangerous in its sophistication. The Gothic Quarter, where their research pointed them, was a labyrinth of medieval streets that had been continuously inhabited for over 2,000 years. Roman ruins coexisted with Gothic cathedrals, Renaissance palaces stood next to modernist apartments, and the narrow alleys held secrets that spanned centuries of Catalan history. Their hotel was a converted palace on Cara del Paradi, just steps from the cathedral and deep in the heart of the old city. From their room's small balcony, Peter could see the intricate spires of the Sagrada Familia in the distance, but his attention was focused on the maze of medieval buildings that surrounded them, one of which supposedly contained the hidden balcony mentioned in his family's documents. According to the Barcelona references in your Portuguese papers, Klaus explained as they settled into their room, your ancestor Mateus wasn't just conducting business in this city. He was involved in a very personal relationship that had significant political implications. Peter spread the photocopied documents across their small table, studying the fragments of text they had been able to decipher. A relationship with whom? That's what we need to find out, Klaus replied. But the documents suggest it was someone from one of Barcelona's noble families, someone whose association with a Portuguese merchant could have been seen as treasonous during certain periods of Catalonian history. The next morning, Peter and Klaus began their systematic exploration of the Gothic Quarter, using the partial addresses and architectural descriptions from the Portuguese documents as their guide. The medieval streets were busy with tourists and locals, providing good cover for their investigations, but the density of historical buildings made their search feel almost impossible. "We're looking for a palace with a distinctive balcony that faces an inner courtyard," Klaus read from his translation notes. The documents mention stone roses carved beneath the ironwork, and a view of 3 church spires from the eastern window. They spent hours walking through Cara del Bisbee, Placa del Rey, and the narrow alleys that connected the major landmarks, photographing balconies and architectural details that might match the descriptions. The Gothic Quarter was full of hidden courtyards and private spaces that weren't visible from the main streets, making their search both fascinating and frustrating. At a small cafe on Placa Sant Jaume, they paused to review their findings and plan their afternoon strategy. Peter noticed that Klaus kept checking his phone, and twice excused himself to take calls that he claimed were from his university supervisor. "Klaus, I need to ask you something directly," Peter said when the German historian returned from his second phone call. "Are you reporting our activities to someone? Because if you are, I need to know about it." Klaus looked uncomfortable but met Peter's gaze directly. "I'm in communication with certain academic institutions that have an interest in our research," he admitted. "But Peter, you have to understand that what we're uncovering is too significant to keep completely secret. There are legitimate scholars and institutions that could help us properly preserve and study these materials. And how do I know these legitimate scholars aren't the same people who confronted us in Granada?" "You don't," Klaus replied honestly. "But you also don't know that they aren't. Peter, we're dealing with historical materials that could reshape our understanding of medieval European trade networks, cultural preservation efforts, and political alliances. That kind of discovery brings both opportunities and risks." Before Peter could respond, an elderly Catalan man at the next table leaned over and spoke to them in accented English. "Excuse me, but I couldn't help overhearing you mention stone roses and church spires. Are you perhaps looking for the Palau de Montcada? What do you think about this elderly man's sudden appearance? Could this be another coincidence? Or is someone else guiding Peter's journey? Share your thoughts in the comments." The elderly man introduced himself as Jordi Valls, a retired professor of medieval Catalan history from the University of Barcelona. He claimed to have overheard their conversation and offered to help with their apparent search for historical buildings in the Gothic Quarter. "The Palau de Montcada," Professor Valls explained, "is one of Barcelona's hidden treasures. It's a 15th century palace that's now privately owned and not open to the public, but it matches your description perfectly. Stone roses, distinctive balconies, and a location that offers views of 3 church spires." Peter and Klaus exchanged glances. The name Montcada hadn't appeared in any of their documents, but Professor Valls seemed genuinely helpful rather than threatening. "The Montcada family," the professor continued, "were one of the most powerful noble houses in medieval Catalonia. They had extensive trade relationships throughout the Mediterranean, including connections to Portuguese merchant families. Would it be possible to visit this palace?" Klaus asked carefully. Professor Valls smiled. "As it happens, I know the current owner. She's a descendant of the original family and quite passionate about preserving the building's historical significance. I could arrange an introduction if you're genuinely interested in academic research." Peter felt his instincts warning him to be cautious, but they needed access to the palace if they were going to continue following their family's trail. "That would be very helpful, Professor Valls. We're researching Portuguese trade networks in medieval Barcelona." "Excellent," the professor exclaimed. "I'll contact Senora Montcada this afternoon. But I should warn you, she's very protective of her family's privacy and historical reputation. You'll need to be prepared to explain your research interests in detail." As Professor Valls departed with their contact information, Peter felt the familiar mixture of opportunity and unease that had characterized each new development in his Spanish adventure. "Another convenient coincidence," he muttered to Klaus. "Or," Klaus replied thoughtfully, evidence that your family's activities in Barcelona were significant enough to leave traces that local historians still remember. That afternoon, while they waited for Professor Valls to arrange their introduction to Senora Montcada, Peter and Klaus visited the Barcelona City Archives, hoping to find official records that might shed light on the Portuguese connections their documents had revealed. The archives were housed in a modern building that contrasted sharply with the medieval streets surrounding it, but the documents inside told stories that stretched back to the founding of the city itself. With the help of a helpful librarian named Maria, they requested access to 15th and 16th century trade records, marriage registrations, and legal documents related to Portuguese merchants. What they found exceeded their most optimistic expectations. "Look at this," Klaus said, pointing to a marriage register from 1487. Isabella de Montcada, age 19, betrothed to Ferdinand de Requesens, age 34, by arrangement of their families. Peter studied the document, noting the formal language and official seals that marked it as a binding legal contract rather than a romantic choice. Arranged marriages were common among noble families. "Yes, but look at this," Klaus continued, showing Peter another document dated 3 months later. A legal complaint filed by the Requesens family, claiming that Isabella de Montcada had been corrupted by foreign influences and requesting that the marriage contract be nullified. Maria, the librarian, leaned over to examine the documents. "That's unusual," she observed. "Marriage contracts between noble families were rarely broken once they were formally agreed upon. There must have been significant scandal involved." They spent the next several hours piecing together fragments of the story from various legal documents, church records, and trade registrations. A picture emerged of Isabella de Montcada as an intelligent and independent young woman who had defied her family's expectations by refusing to proceed with her arranged marriage. "Here," Peter said, finding a document that made his pulse quicken. A trade agreement between the Montcada family and Mateus of Porto, merchant and navigator, dated 6 months before Isabella's supposed wedding. Klaus examined the contract carefully. "This isn't just a standard trade agreement. Look at the personal clauses, provisions for private meetings, guarantees of confidentiality, and what appears to be a mutual protection clause." A protection clause? An agreement that both parties would help protect the other from political or legal difficulties. "Peter, I think your ancestor and Isabella de Montcada were more than business partners." Maria, who had been following their research with growing interest, made a suggestion. "If you're trying to understand the relationship between these two people, you should also check the church records. Even if they couldn't marry officially, there might be evidence of unofficial ceremonies or blessing rituals." Their search through the ecclesiastical archives revealed the most romantic and tragic elements of the story. Hidden among routine baptism and death records, they found evidence of secret meetings between Mateus and Isabella, conducted with the help of sympathetic clergy who were willing to bend official rules for star-crossed lovers. "This is incredible," Peter said, reading a letter from a Portuguese chaplain to his superior in Lisbon. He's requesting permission to perform a spiritual union ceremony for a Portuguese merchant and a Catalan noblewoman, arguing that their love transcends political boundaries. Klaus was examining a collection of what appeared to be love letters, written in a mixture of Portuguese and Catalan. "Peter, I think these are original correspondence between your ancestor and Isabella, and they're not just romantic. They contain detailed information about secret trade routes, hidden assets, and what appears to be a network of safe houses across the Mediterranean." As evening approached, Peter and Klaus returned to their hotel with copies of the most significant documents they had discovered. The story of Mateus and Isabella's forbidden romance was both touching and politically complex, but Peter was still struggling to understand how it connected to the broader mystery of his family's hidden legacy. "There's something I need to tell you," Klaus said as they settled into their room to study their findings. "Something about my own family's connection to this story." Peter looked up from the love letters he had been trying to translate. "What kind of connection?" Klaus opened his laptop and pulled up a genealogical chart that looked similar to the ones they had found in Toledo and Granada. "My family name, Weber, is also an anglicization. The original name was Weiss, and we weren't just German academics. We were part of a network of Jewish scholars who served as cultural intermediaries throughout medieval Europe. Peter felt a familiar chill. Intermediaries for what? For families like yours who needed to move assets, documents, and sometimes people across political boundaries without attracting official attention. My ancestor, Joseph Weiss, was the one who helped arrange secret communications between Matthias and Isabella. Klaus showed Peter a document from his own family's archives, a letter of recommendation written in medieval Latin, praising Joseph Weiss for his discretion and reliability in handling sensitive international correspondence. So your family has been involved in this story from the beginning, Peter said, trying to process the implications. Not just involved, Klaus corrected. Our families have been working together for over 5 centuries. When Matthias and Isabella's relationship became politically dangerous, it was Joseph Weiss who helped them establish the hidden archive system that we've been following from Toledo to Granada to Barcelona. Peter stared at his traveling companion with new understanding. That's how you knew so much about my family's documents. That's how you happened to be in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. My grandfather left very specific instructions, Klaus admitted. If a member of the Matthias family ever came to Europe seeking their hidden heritage, the Weiss family was obligated to help them. It's a debt of honor that goes back 500 years. Before Peter could respond, his phone rang. Professor Valls was calling with news about their requested meeting with Senora Moncada. Excellent news, the professor reported. She's agreed to meet with you tomorrow evening. But she has some conditions. You must come alone, you cannot bring recording equipment, and you must be prepared to prove your legitimate academic interest in her family's history. Peter looked at Klaus, who had been listening to the conversation. Did he say come alone? Yes, Klaus confirmed with a slight frown. That's unusual. After ending the call, Peter paced their small room, trying to decide whether to trust Klaus's revelations about their family's historical connection or to view them as an elaborate deception designed to manipulate him. Klaus, I want to believe you, but every time I think I understand our partnership, you reveal another layer of connection that you supposedly forgot to mention earlier. I understand your suspicion, Klaus replied. But Peter, consider this. If I were trying to deceive you or steal your family's assets, would I really reveal so much about my own family's involvement? Wouldn't it be easier to maintain the fiction that we were strangers who happened to meet in Toledo? Peter had to admit that Klaus's logic made sense, but his Chicago-trained paranoia wasn't easily dismissed. The next evening, Peter made his way alone through the narrow streets of the Gothic Quarter to his appointment with Senora Moncada. Klaus had been disappointed to be excluded from the meeting, but he had accepted the condition gracefully and promised to continue researching the documents they had gathered. The Palau de Moncada was located on a small street that Peter had walked past several times without noticing the discreet entrance. The building's facade was elegant but understated, giving no hint of the historical treasures that might lie within. Senora Elena Moncada was a woman in her 60s with silver hair, intelligent eyes, and an aristocratic bearing that suggested centuries of noble breeding. She received Peter in a sitting room that was furnished with antiques that appeared to be original to the building's 15th century construction. Mr. Matthews, she said in excellent English, Professor Valls tells me that you are researching Portuguese trade networks in medieval Barcelona, but I suspect your interest in my family is more personal than academic. Peter decided that honesty was his best strategy. You're right, Senora Moncada. I believe one of your ancestors had a relationship with one of my ancestors, a Portuguese merchant named Matthias. Elena Moncada's expression softened slightly. Isabella and Matthias. Yes, their story has been preserved in my family for many generations. A tragic love affair that defied political boundaries and social expectations. I found some documents that suggest their relationship was more than just romantic, that they were involved in some kind of cultural preservation network. They were, Elena confirmed. Isabella was not just a romantic rebel. She was also a scholar and a cultural preservationist. She used her family's wealth and political connections to help protect manuscripts, artworks, and historical documents during periods of political upheaval. Elena led Peter through several rooms of the palace, each filled with historical artifacts and family portraits that spanned centuries. But their destination was a small chamber on the upper floor, accessed through a narrow staircase that was clearly not intended for public tours. This was Isabella's private study, Elena explained as they entered a room lined with ancient books and illuminated by tall windows that did indeed offer views of 3 church spires. And this is the balcony where she left messages for Mateus when direct communication became too dangerous. The balcony was small and intimate, decorated with the stone roses that the Portuguese documents had described. Ironwork that was clearly original to the 15th century supported a narrow platform that overlooked an inner courtyard hidden from the main street. The messages were hidden here, Elena said, showing Peter a section of the stone balustrade that appeared to have been carefully modified. Isabella developed a system of removable stones that created a secret compartment. With Elena's permission, Peter examined the hiding place. The mechanism was ingenious. Stones that appeared to be fixed in place could actually be lifted out to reveal a waterproof cavity large enough to hold letters or small documents. "Are there any messages still hidden here?" Peter asked hopefully. Elena smiled mysteriously. "There's something I think you should see. Thank you for staying with us this far." Peter is about to discover something incredible in Isabella's secret hiding place. What do you think has been waiting there for 500 years? And can Peter really trust everyone who's been helping him? The best revelations are coming up next. Elena carefully removed several of the modified stones, revealing the hidden compartment that had served as a secret mailbox for forbidden lovers 5 centuries ago. Inside, wrapped in oiled leather that had preserved them remarkably well, were several items that took Peter's breath away. The first was a collection of love letters written in Mateus's own hand, expressing not just romantic passion but also detailed plans for preserving Portuguese cultural artifacts in various Spanish cities. The second was a small leather journal that appeared to contain coded information about secret routes and safe houses throughout the Mediterranean. But the most significant discovery was a detailed map of Barcelona itself, showing the locations of hidden chambers and safe houses that had been used by the Portuguese Preservation Network. Several locations were marked with symbols that matched those Peter had seen in Toledo and Granada. "These have been waiting for someone from Mateus's family to claim them," Elena explained. Isabella left instructions that they should only be revealed to someone who could prove their connection to the Portuguese Preservation Network. Peter studied the map with growing excitement. "Some of these locations still exist?" "Most of them," Elena confirmed. "The building owners have changed over the centuries, but the physical structures remain. Barcelona's Gothic quarter is remarkably well preserved." But as Peter examined the documents more closely, he noticed something that sent a chill through him. Several of the letters referenced a trusted German intermediary who helped facilitate communication between Mateus and Isabella, undoubtedly Klaus's ancestor Joseph Weiss. "Senora Moncada, did your family maintain contact with the German intermediary's descendants?" Elena nodded. "The Weiss family, yes. We've had occasional communication over the centuries, mostly regarding the preservation of historical documents. In fact, I received a call just yesterday from someone claiming to be from that family, asking about your visit." Peter's blood ran cold. "Someone called you about me?" "A young man with a German accent, claiming to be researching the same historical networks you are. He seemed quite knowledgeable about our family's connection to the Portuguese preservation efforts." Peter realized that Klaus had been in communication with Elena Moncada before their supposedly chance encounter with Professor Valls. His traveling companion had been orchestrating their movements in Barcelona just as carefully as he had in Toledo and Granada. "Senora Moncada, I think I may be in more danger than I realized. Can you help me understand what other parties might be interested in these historical networks?" Elena's expression became serious. "Mr. Matthews, the preservation networks that your ancestors helped establish weren't just cultural projects. They were also financial networks, moving valuable assets across political boundaries. Some of those financial networks still exist today, and they're worth billions of euros." The revelation hit Peter like a physical blow. His family hadn't just been preserving manuscripts and artifacts. They had been operating one of Europe's oldest and most valuable financial networks, using cultural preservation as cover for moving assets across international boundaries. That's why so many people are interested in your research, Elena continued. The documents and maps you're uncovering don't just have historical value. They could provide access to assets that have been accumulating interest for 5 centuries. Peter left the Palau de Montcada with his mind racing and a leather satchel containing photocopies of Isabella's hidden documents. Elena had insisted he take them, arguing that they rightfully belonged to Mateus's descendants, but she had also warned him to be extremely careful about who he trusted with the information they contained. As he walked through the narrow streets back toward his hotel, Peter found himself constantly checking for signs that he was being followed. The revelation that Klaus had been in secret communication with Elena Moncada had shattered his faith in their partnership, but he wasn't sure how to confront the German historian without revealing that he knew about the deception. When he reached their hotel, Peter found Klaus waiting in their room with 2 cups of coffee and an expression of eager anticipation. "How did your meeting go?" Klaus asked. "Were you able to access Isabella's balcony?" Peter decided to test his companion's honesty. It was interesting, but Senora Moncada was very cautious. She didn't reveal much beyond basic family history. Klaus's expression remained neutral, but Peter caught a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. "That's unfortunate. Did she mention whether Isabella left any documents or messages for Mateus?" The question confirmed Peter's suspicions. Klaus knew exactly what Elena Moncada possessed and was fishing for information about what Peter had or hadn't learned. She mentioned some old letters, but said they were too fragile to examine. Peter lied smoothly. "Maybe if we contacted her again in a few days." "Actually," Klaus interrupted, "I've been thinking that we might want to accelerate our timeline. I received word from my university contacts that other research teams are planning similar investigations in Barcelona. We might want to move on to our next destination sooner rather than later." Peter felt the familiar chill of manipulation. Klaus was trying to rush him away from Barcelona before he could fully explore what Elena Moncada had revealed. "What's our next destination?" Peter asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Based on the documents we found in Granada, I think we should head to Zaragoza," Klaus replied. "There are references to a monastery there that served as a major hub for the preservation network." Peter nodded as if he agreed, but his mind was already working on a different plan. The documents Elena had given him contained enough information to continue his research independently, and he was no longer willing to trust Klaus with his family's secrets. "That sounds like a good plan," Peter said aloud. "Should we book train tickets for tomorrow?" "Actually," Klaus replied, checking his phone, "I have a few academic contacts I need to consult first. Would it be possible to delay our departure until the day after tomorrow?" "Of course," Peter agreed, though he had no intention of still being in Barcelona when Klaus was ready to leave. That night, after Klaus had gone to sleep, Peter carefully packed his essential belongings and the documents from Elena Moncada into a small backpack. He left a note explaining that he had decided to continue his research alone, thanking Klaus for his help but stating that he needed time to process everything they had discovered. By dawn, Peter was on a train heading northwest toward Zaragoza, carrying with him not just the secrets of his Portuguese ancestors, but also a growing understanding of the complex web of financial and political interests that his family legacy had created. Klaus had been right about one thing: this was much more than historical research. It was a treasure hunt that could reshape his understanding of international finance, cultural preservation, and his own identity. As the Catalonian countryside gave way to the plains of Aragon, Peter reflected on how dramatically his simple escape from Chicago had evolved. He had come to Spain seeking freedom from his past as an information broker, but instead had discovered that his family had been in the information business for over 5 centuries. The question now was whether he could stay ahead of all the parties who seemed to want control over what he was uncovering, and whether the secrets waiting in Zaragoza would provide answers or simply deepen the mystery of his Portuguese heritage. But one thing had become clear during his time in Barcelona. The story of Mateus and Isabella wasn't just a romantic tragedy from the distant past. It was the foundation of a network that was still active, still valuable, and still dangerous to those who sought to uncover its secrets. The love letters hidden in Isabella's balcony had waited 500 years for Peter to find them, but the game they described was still being played by powerful players who preferred to remain in the shadows. Thank you for staying with us through this incredible revelation in Barcelona. The romance between Mateus and Isabella proved to be much more than a love story. It was the foundation of a financial network that's still worth billions today. Peter's discovery that Klaus has been manipulating their partnership from the beginning changes everything. Can our protagonist stay ahead of all the parties tracking his movements? And what secrets wait in the monasteries of Zaragoza? The hidden balcony revealed that Peter's family legacy involves not just cultural preservation, but one of Europe's oldest financial networks. The stakes have never been higher, and Peter is now truly on his own, as he continues following the trail his ancestors left across Spain. What do you think Peter will find in Zaragoza? Was he right to abandon Klaus? Or has he made a dangerous mistake by traveling alone? Share your theories in the comments below. Don't miss the next episode, The Silent Bells of Zaragoza, where Peter will discover that some secrets are guarded by forces even more ancient and mysterious than financial networks and political conspiracies. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a moment of Peter's incredible journey through Spain's hidden history. The greatest challenges and the most shocking revelations are still ahead. The train from Barcelona to Zaragoza carried Peter through the heart of Aragon, a landscape of rolling hills and ancient towns that seemed unchanged since medieval times. For the first time since arriving in Spain, he was truly alone. No Klaus to provide historical context, no mysterious guides appearing at convenient moments, no one but himself to make decisions about where his ancestral trail would lead him next. The solitude was both liberating and terrifying. Without Klaus's academic expertise, Peter would have to rely on his own research skills and the documents he had gathered in Barcelona. Elena Moncada's papers had mentioned Zaragoza specifically, describing it as a silent sanctuary, where the Mateus family had established one of their most important safe houses during the late 15th century. As the train approached Zaragoza, Peter could see the distinctive silhouette of the Basilica del Pilar rising above the Ebro River, its Baroque towers and colorful tile domes creating one of Spain's most recognizable skylines. But what struck him as unusual, even from a distance, was the complete silence that seemed to emanate from the city's many church towers. Zaragoza was a city of churches, dozens of bell towers dotted the skyline, from Gothic cathedrals to Baroque basilicas to simple parish churches. Yet as Peter walked from the train station toward the historic center, he realized that he hadn't heard a single church bell since arriving. The silence was so complete that it felt almost oppressive, as if the entire city was holding its breath. His hotel was a converted palace near the Cathedral of the Savior, in the heart of the old city. The desk clerk, a friendly young woman named Pilar, welcomed him in excellent English and offered recommendations for local attractions and restaurants. "Tell me," Peter asked as he registered, "I noticed something unusual about the city. Are the church bells broken? I haven't heard any since I arrived." Pilar's expression shifted slightly, becoming more cautious. "Ah, you've noticed the silence. It's one of Zaragoza's most famous mysteries. The bells of our major churches haven't rung for over 500 years. 500 years? Peter felt his pulse quicken. Since when exactly? Since 1487, according to the city records. One day they simply stopped ringing, all of them at once. The official explanation is that there was some kind of technical problem with the bell mechanisms, but... Pilar lowered her voice as if sharing a secret. Local legend says they were silenced by a curse. That something happened in the old monastery outside the city. Something so terrible that the bells refused to ring again. Peter spent his first evening in Zaragoza walking through the old city, observing the bell towers that rose above him in complete silence. The absence of bells created an eerie atmosphere, especially at sunset when most Spanish cities would normally be filled with the sound of church chimes marking the evening hours. At a small restaurant near the Plaza del Pilar, Peter struck up a conversation with the owner, an elderly man named Miguel who claimed his family had lived in Zaragoza for generations. "The silent bells," Miguel said when Peter mentioned his curiosity about the phenomenon. My grandfather used to tell stories about the last day they rang. He said it was during the festival of San Vicente Martir, January 22nd, 1487. The bells were ringing for the morning mass when suddenly, all at once, they went silent. All at once? Peter asked. That seems impossible unless someone deliberately stopped them. Miguel nodded knowingly. That's what some people believe, that it wasn't a curse or a technical failure, but a deliberate act. But why anyone would silence an entire city's bells, and how they managed to do it simultaneously? He shrugged. Peter pulled out his phone and showed Miguel a photograph of one of the Portuguese documents from Barcelona. Have you ever seen symbols like these in any local historical records? Miguel examined the image carefully, then called over his wife, Carmen, who had been listening to their conversation from behind the bar. These symbols, Carmen said after studying the photograph, they look similar to markings we've seen in the old monastery, the Monasterio de Santa Engracia, outside the city. It was abandoned not long after the bells fell silent. Is it possible to visit this monastery? Peter asked. Miguel and Carmen exchanged glances. It's on private land now, Miguel replied carefully, but there are hiking trails that pass near the ruins. If someone were interested in historical research, Carmen wrote down directions on a napkin and handed it to Peter. Be careful if you go there, she warned. The current landowner doesn't welcome visitors, and the ruins can be dangerous. That night, in his hotel room, Peter compared the directions Carmen had given him with the maps he had acquired in Barcelona. The location of the abandoned monastery corresponded exactly with a site marked on Isabella's secret map, a place labeled Sanctuary of the Silent Guardians. The next morning, Peter visited Zaragoza's main historical archive, hoping to find official records that might explain the simultaneous silencing of the city's bells. The archivist, a scholarly woman named Dr. Rosa Martinez, was helpful but puzzled by his specific research interest. The bell incident of 1487 is one of our most documented mysteries, Dr. Martinez explained as she retrieved several boxes of historical materials. We have extensive records from the city council meetings, church registers, and even personal diaries from that period. Peter spent hours reviewing the documents, most of which were written in medieval Spanish that challenged his language skills. But gradually, a pattern emerged that confirmed his growing suspicions about his family's involvement. Look at this, he said, showing Dr. Martinez a city council record from late January 1487. It mentions a group of Portuguese merchants who had been conducting business with local monasteries for several months before the bell incident. Dr. Martinez examined the document more carefully. Yes, and here's something interesting. They weren't just any Portuguese merchants. They were specifically dealing in sacred artifacts and manuscript preservation. That was unusual for Portuguese traders, who normally focused on maritime goods. Another document caught Peter's attention. A letter from the abbot of the Monasterio de Santa Engracia to the Bishop of Zaragoza, dated 3 days before the bells fell silent. The letter mentioned grave concerns about the security of our most precious holdings and requested permission to implement emergency preservation measures. Dr. Martinez, what would constitute emergency preservation measures in a 15th century monastery? Typically, it would mean moving valuable manuscripts and artifacts to secure locations, often with the help of trusted merchants who had experience in such matters, she replied. But the timing suggests that whatever they were preserving was considered extremely urgent. The most revealing document was a financial record showing substantial payments made by the monastery to Mateus de Porto and Associates for discretionary services rendered during the period of silence. The payment was dated February 15, 1487, nearly 3 weeks after the bells had stopped ringing. Peter realized that the bell incident wasn't a mystery or a curse. It was a deliberate operation orchestrated by his Portuguese ancestors as cover for moving valuable assets out of the monastery. What do you think Peter's ancestors were really doing in that monastery? And why did they need to silence an entire city's bells to accomplish it? Share your theories in the comments. Dr. Martinez helped Peter locate additional documents that painted a clearer picture of what had happened in early 1487. Political tensions between Aragon and Castile were rising, and several monasteries throughout the region had been forced to relocate their most valuable holdings to prevent them from being seized by royal agents. The Monasterio de Santa Engracia was particularly wealthy, Dr. Martinez explained. It housed one of the most important manuscript collections in northern Spain, including scientific treatises, philosophical works, and what some records describe as charts of unknown lands. Charts of unknown lands? Peter's interest sharpened. From Portuguese exploration? Possibly. The monastery had strong connections to Portuguese scholarly networks, and this was during the height of the Age of Exploration. Such charts would have been extraordinarily valuable. A personal diary from a local nobleman provided the final piece of the puzzle. The nobleman described waking up on the morning of January 22nd to complete silence, then noticing unusual activity around the monastery throughout the following week, wagons arriving and departing at night, groups of men working by torchlight, and finally the complete abandonment of the facility. Your ancestors, Dr. Martinez concluded after reviewing all the evidence, appear to have orchestrated one of the most sophisticated historical preservation operations on record. They used the mystery and fear created by the silent bells to keep curious locals away, while they safely relocated an entire monastery's collection. Peter felt a mixture of pride and apprehension as he realized the scope of his family's activities. The Mateus family weren't just merchants or even cultural preservationists. They were master strategists who could manipulate entire cities to achieve their goals. But the documents also raised troubling questions. If the monastery's collection had been relocated in 1487, where had it been taken? And why were there no records of what had happened to these valuable manuscripts and artifacts? The answer, Peter suspected, lay in the ruins of the Monasterio de Santa Engracia itself. Peter rented a small car and followed Carmen's directions to the abandoned monastery, driving through countryside that looked much as it would have 5 centuries ago. The ruins were located on a hillside about 15 kilometers outside Zaragoza, surrounded by vineyards and olive groves that belonged to a private estate. The current landowners' no trespassing signs were prominently displayed, but Peter noticed that the hiking trail Carmen had mentioned did indeed provide access to the area around the monastery without technically entering private property. The ruins themselves were more extensive than Peter had expected. What remained of the Monasterio de Santa Engracia suggested it had been a large and prosperous institution, with multiple buildings, courtyards, and what appeared to have been an impressive library or scriptorium. Peter spent nearly an hour exploring the accessible areas of the ruins, photographing architectural details, and searching for any symbols or markings that might correspond to the Portuguese documents he carried. Most of the walls had been weathered by centuries of Spanish sun and rain, but in one sheltered courtyard, he found what he was looking for. Carved into the stones around what had once been a doorway were symbols that matched exactly those he had seen on the documents from Toledo, Granada, and Barcelona. But these carvings included additional elements, arrows and directional markers that appeared to form a kind of map. Following the carved directions, Peter discovered that they led to what had once been the monastery's wine cellar. The entrance was partially collapsed, but there was enough space for a person to squeeze through if they were willing to risk the unstable stones. Inside the cellar, Peter found evidence that the space had been used for more than storing wine. The walls were lined with niches that could have held manuscripts or artifacts, and there were clear signs that heavy objects had been moved through the space relatively recently, within the last few decades rather than centuries. But the most significant discovery was a modern metal lockbox hidden behind loose stones in one of the niches. The box was secured with a combination lock that looked like it had been installed within the last 20 or 30 years. Peter stared at the modern lockbox with growing unease. Someone had been using this abandoned monastery much more recently than the 15th century, and they had been storing something valuable enough to require a secure container. After examining the lock more carefully, Peter realized it was a standard 4-digit combination. Given his family's consistent use of significant dates, he decided to try 1487, the year the bells had been silenced. The lock clicked open. Inside the box, Peter found documents that made him question everything he thought he understood about his family's historical preservation network. The papers were recent, some dated within the last 5 years, and they were written in English, German, and Portuguese. The documents revealed that the Historical Preservation Network established by his Portuguese ancestors, was still operational. Not as a quaint family tradition or academic exercise, but as a sophisticated international organization involved in moving valuable assets across borders, protecting politically sensitive information, and maintaining financial networks that operated outside normal banking systems. Peter found correspondence referring to client accounts managed since 1487, financial statements showing millions of euros in assets, and what appeared to be coded communications between members of families whose names he recognized from his research, including Weber, Moncada, and several others. But the most shocking discovery was a recent report addressed to P. Matthews, final inheritor, and dated just 3 months ago. The report detailed his activities in Chicago, his decision to leave the United States, and projections about his likely travel patterns in Spain. Subject has extensive experience in information brokerage and international asset movement, the report stated. Skills consistent with family tradition. Recommend activation of inheritance protocols upon confirmation of identity and commitment. Peter realized that his entire Spanish adventure had been orchestrated from the beginning, not by Klaus alone, but by a network of families and organizations that had been monitoring him for years, waiting for the right moment to bring him into their operation. A sound from outside the cellar interrupted his reading. Footsteps, multiple people, approaching the monastery ruins. Peter quickly photographed the most important documents and returned them to the lockbox, then looked for alternative exits from the cellar. The footsteps were getting closer, and voices, speaking in accented English, suggested that whoever was approaching knew exactly where to find him. Thank you for staying with us through these incredible revelations. Peter has discovered that his family's historical preservation network is still very much alive and operating in the modern world. But who's coming for him at the monastery? And what do they want? Peter found a narrow passage at the back of the wine cellar that appeared to connect to the monastery's original drainage system. The passage was cramped and partially blocked by debris, but it offered a way out that wouldn't require him to confront whoever was approaching the main ruins. As he crawled through the narrow tunnel, Peter could hear voices from above becoming clearer. One voice he recognized with a chill: Klaus Weber, speaking in rapid German to at least 2 other people. Should be in the cellar by now, Klaus was saying in English. The activation protocols indicate he would follow the historical progression we established. Another voice, with a British accent, replied, and if he's not ready to cooperate voluntarily, then we proceed with alternative measures, Klaus answered coldly. The network has been patient for 5 centuries. We can't allow personal sentimentality to compromise the operation now. Peter emerged from the drainage tunnel about 50 meters from the main monastery ruins, hidden by olive trees that provided cover while he made his way back toward his rental car. Behind him, he could hear the sounds of Klaus and his associates searching the cellar, discovering the lockbox he had just examined. As Peter drove back toward Zaragoza, his mind raced to process what he had learned. The documents in the monastery had mentioned La Rioja as the location of the next major asset cache, describing a vineyard sanctuary that had been established using proceeds from the Zaragoza operation in 1487. But more importantly, the modern documents had made it clear that Peter was now considered either a valuable recruit or a dangerous liability by the network his ancestors had created. His choice to abandon Klaus in Barcelona had apparently triggered some kind of escalation protocol. Peter realized he needed to stay ahead of Klaus and his associates while also deciding whether he wanted to claim his inheritance in this ancient network or find a way to escape from it entirely. Back in Zaragoza, Peter quickly packed his belongings and checked out of his hotel, paying in cash and providing false information about his next destination. The documents from the monastery had been specific about the location in La Rioja, a vineyard called Bodega de los Secretos near the town of Haro, established in the late 15th century and still operating as a winery. As he prepared to leave the city, Peter took one last walk through the historic center, passing the silent bell towers that had started his investigation. Now he understood that the bells hadn't been cursed or broken. They had been deliberately silenced by his ancestors as part of an elaborate deception designed to facilitate one of history's most successful asset protection operations. The silence that had mystified Zaragoza for over 500 years was actually a monument to the Mateus family's strategic brilliance. but it was also a warning about the lengths they were willing to go to protect their secrets. Peter's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "The vineyard is expecting you, Peter. Some traditions are too important to abandon. Your ancestors understood duty. We hope you do as well." As Peter drove northwest toward La Rioja, he found himself at a crossroads that went beyond simple geography. He could continue following the trail his ancestors had left, potentially claiming access to centuries of accumulated wealth and power, but also accepting responsibility for activities that operated in moral gray areas and attracted dangerous attention. Or he could try to disappear entirely, abandoning his family legacy and finding a way to start over without the burden of 5 centuries of hidden history. But as the vineyards of La Rioja appeared on the horizon, Peter realized that the choice might not be entirely his to make. The network his ancestors had created was powerful, sophisticated, and had been planning for his involvement for decades. Walking away might not be as simple as buying a plane ticket back to Chicago. The silent bells of Zaragoza had revealed more than just historical mysteries. They had shown Peter that his family's legacy involved manipulating entire cities, creating elaborate deceptions, and maintaining secrets that could reshape international finance and cultural preservation. Now he had to decide whether he was ready to become the next guardian of those secrets, or whether he would find a way to break the chain of inheritance that stretched back over 500 years. As his car wound through the rolling hills of La Rioja, surrounded by vineyards that might hold the answers to all his questions, Peter Matthews prepared for what could be the most important decision of his life. Thank you for staying with us through this incredible revelation in Zaragoza. The silent bells weren't cursed or broken. They were silenced by Peter's brilliant ancestors as part of an elaborate 500-year deception. But now Peter has discovered that the Historical Preservation Network is still very much alive and operating in the modern world, with Klaus and his associates tracking his every move. The documents at the monastery revealed that Peter's entire journey has been orchestrated to bring him into a sophisticated international operation. The choice facing Peter is no longer just about discovering his family history. It's about whether he's willing to become part of a network that has been manipulating events for centuries. And the mysterious vineyard in La Rioja may hold the final answers he needs to make that decision. What do you think Peter should do? Join the network that his ancestors created, or find a way to escape from centuries of family obligation? And what secrets could an ancient vineyard be hiding in the wine region of La Rioja? Don't miss the next episode, The Lost Vineyard of La Rioja, where Peter will discover that some family legacies come with prices that go far beyond money and power. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a moment of Peter's incredible journey through Spain's hidden history. The most crucial decisions of his life are just ahead.